I'm Alex Green, and this is Stereo Embers, the podcast. Check this out. Alright, not only did I almost play that song all the way through, I almost played it twice. You were just hearing Flip Your Wig by Hüsker, which features my guest today on the program, bassist Greg Norton. Let me tell you a little bit about Greg Norton. Greg Norton was born in a Catholic hospital in Davenport, Iowa. Now, that soon-to-be metropolitan city called Davenport was actually named after George Davenport. He was an English sailor who fought for the U.S. in the War of 1812. Why was this notable? Well, because the U.S. was fighting Britain at the time over violations of U.S. maritime rights. The British-born Davenport was probably getting a lot of emails saying, George, are you going to come over and help us fight? And Davenport was like, no. And they were like, why? And he was like, because I live in Iowa now, bro. You can see why I never taught history. Now, we're not going to spend too much time in Davenport. Want to hear why? Because Greg Norton didn't. Actually, for the sake of historical accuracy, Norton's family lived in Rock Island, Illinois at the time of his birth. And, before he was a year old, they had relocated to Omaha, Nebraska. Then, when Norton was 4, his family moved to where his mother's side came from, St. Paul, Minnesota. And, as these things happen, Norton's grandmother's house was only a few blocks away from the boyhood home of Grant Hart, who, at the time, was still a boy. Now, Siri can tell you a lot of things, like how to get from Davenport to Omaha, and how to get from Omaha to St. Paul, and how to go from your new house in St. Paul to Grant Hart's house in St. Paul. But what Siri could never tell you was just how profound the space between Greg Norton's house and Grant Hart's house really was. Raised in the Minneapolis suburb of Mendota Heights, Greg Norton grew up listening to the Beatles, and the steady, inventive pull of Paul McCartney's bass lines found him gravitating towards the instrument. He got his first bass guitar when he was 14, and, thanks to an older sister and brother who were 9 and 4 years his seniors, Norton got turned on to a lot of cool music at a really early age. Zeppelin and Hendrix were on steady rotation in his bedroom, but that kind of virtuoso playing was kind of intimidating to the fledgling musician. Enter 1978. The fiery, lippy, and sometimes even sloppy bombast of punk rock not only rang Norton's bell, it made him think, I can do this. Now, here's something about those punk rock records that Norton loved so much. He was surrounded by them. The 18-year-old bassist had taken a job at a record store called Melody Lane in West St. Paul, and he was in heaven. But no sooner had he started than a burly 16-year-old named Grant Hart called him out for taking his job. Unbeknownst to Norton, the store manager had previously told Hart he could have a job at Melody Lane once he turned 16. He was probably saying that just to get rid of him, but as soon as Grant Hart turned 16, he went to get that job. And, instead, he got Greg Norton, and he wasn't pleased. But here's the thing about Greg Norton. He's a cool guy. And, because he knew the assistant manager, he pulled what strings could be pulled, and just like that, Hart and Norton were working together at Melody Lane in perfect harmony. Greg Norton and Grant Hart became fast friends, hanging out all the time. Not only did they share a love of punk rock, they both shared a love of the Marx Brothers. Now, Norton later became instantly recognizable for his handlebar mustache, and as a kid growing up in the 80s, I used to call him the Raleigh Fingers of post-punk. Raleigh Fingers was a pitcher for the Padres who had that same exact mustache. Although, I don't think his teammates ever referred to him as the Greg Norton of baseball. Anyway, I'm only bringing this up because it may very well have been Norton's adoration of the comedy of the Marx Brothers that inspired him to grow that mustache in the first place. But, back to our story. This show is not sponsored by the Dollar Shave Club, so we will move on. Now, Hart brought his drum kit over to Norton's house, and for months they would just jam around, tossing ideas back and forth. Fun fact, at the time, Grant Hart was in a Beatles cover band called Train. No, not that Train. His job in that band was playing keyboards and handling background vocals. Now, any great rock and roll story has a record store as its connective tissue, and this story is no different. Grant Hart and Bob Mould met at a record store, and they became fast friends. Everyone in the story becomes fast friends. Hart started to hang out with Mould at his college dorm, then they started jamming, then they added Norton to the mix, then they added another guy, and then they were a band called Buddy and the Returnables. Now, as far as cover bands go, Buddy and the Returnables were pretty cool, but the sound of the keyboard, played by that fourth member, Charlie Pine, was starting to bug Norton and Mould and Hart, and so they sacked Pine. They renamed themselves Hüsker Du, which was the name of a 70s memory board game, and Danish for Do You Remember, and the rest, as they say, is history. Hüsker Du went on to become one of the most important and influential bands of all time. A primal blend of buzzsaw guitars, crashing cymbals, and prowling bass lines. Their music was a feral blast of jagged beauty, played with speed, power, and conviction. And because all three members of the band were Beatles fans, it was no surprise that gorgeous harmonies and huge hooks burned through their blistering aural landscape. During their time together, Hüsker Du put out 6 albums. Their swan song was 1987's Warehouse Songs and Stories, an absolutely Goliath double album that was not only filled with smoldering post-punk, it hinted at an endless possibility of future sonic directions. But those directions were to be taken separately. The suicide of their manager, combined with drug use and inner friction, cracked the band clean in half. And in 1987, Hüsker Du was all over. Mould and Hart went solo, then Mould fronted Sugar, and Hart took the helm of Nova Mob. As for Norton, he played in Grey Area, then he played in Shotgun Rationale, and then, you guessed it, he became a chef. It's true. Norton and his wife at the time owned the Red Wing, Minnesota restaurant, The Nortons, and while operating that business, Norton put his bass guitar down for 14 years. He returned to music in 2006 with the band The Gang Font featuring Interloper, and now he's back again, this time with the Minnesota-based band Porcupine. Porcupine's new effort, What You've Heard Isn't Real, is out now. And let me say this about the record. This power trio's melodic assault brings to mind the roster of the Hüsker's old label SST Records when they were in their heyday. Falling somewhere between Mission of Burma and early Buffalo Tom, Porcupine's new one is crunchy, catchy, and cool. And I should tell you that the album contains an homage to Norton's fallen friend, the late Grant Hart. This homage comes in the form of a cover of Hart's song, Standing by the Sea. As for Norton, his bass playing is as strong and inventive as ever, and he's still got the mustache, but there's something very different about Greg Norton these days. He's a dad. We talk about becoming a father late in life, we talk about Porcupine, and we talk about Hüsker Du. It's a great conversation, and I'm glad you're here to hear it. So, enjoy my chat with Greg Norton, right here on Stereo Embers, the podcast.
I kind of go through bouts where I will, practice like technical stuff for a while, but then I'll just usually I just play. I just start playing and start finding grooves to work and taking it from there. Never really sat down and played to records that much. Just kind of made stuff up on my own. So.
Well, when you were a kid and you were listening to records, were there guys that were playing where you thought, well, that's the guy I want to be? Like that's the guy that's really inspiring to me.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, listening to the bass lines that Paul McCartney played, or John Entwistle, or Chris Squire from Yes. All three of those guys were very inspirational. As far as going like, wow, that was cool. Yeah, I want to try to do that.
You always struck me as you're one of those guys that looks good holding a bass, and I thought obviously you chose the right instrument.
Okay.
And I wonder about that, where did it feel natural to you from the very beginning, or was there a learning curve in terms of like, oh, this feels awkward, or did you just sort of like pick it up and go, oh yeah, this is the way to go?
It's like a lot of kids that it's like, oh, I want to be a guitar player, but I always kind of had big hands, and guitar was, I don't know, kind of difficult for me to, no pun intended, get a grasp on it. But so when I discovered the bass, I was like, okay, yeah, this feels a lot more natural. It just fit better, and it felt right. So took it from there.
What about all the years that you weren't playing? Were you, when you would walk by the bass, would you sort of go, I'll get to you, right? But right now I'm busy, or were you still practicing?
Well, after Hüsker Du broke up, and once I started into the restaurant business and got into the kitchen, and was just working so much, so many hours every week. I literally went like 14 years without even picking up my bass. And then, I met Dave King after a Bad Plus show back in 2003. And he's like, hey, I got this crazy idea for this band, and I think you'd be the perfect bass player for it. And I'm like, okay. So I actually started picking up the bass and reacquainting myself with it, and that's how Gang Font came about. Gang Font is, it took us literally 2 years from that conversation to our first rehearsal, and then, we wrote a record, put it out, and then 2010 we wrote another record and recorded it, and it's still in the can. Gang Font plays about once a year. So when Casey called and said, hey, do you still play your bass? And I'm like, yeah, of course I do. And I said, I'd really like to be playing a lot more than I, the 1 gig a year that I get to play in Gang Font. And he's like, well, why don't you join Porcupine? And I'm like, I would love to. So that's kind of how that came about.
That sounds so easy.
I guess organic is a good way to put it.
We'll go with organic. In the time that you weren't playing, 14 years, when you say that now out loud, do you kind of go, man, that was a long time?
That was a long time. Yeah. So, but, getting back into it, it was, obviously, you gotta wake up those muscles and get the right brain synapses firing and all that. So, it was a fun challenge to jump back into it. But, I think a lot of people have the ability. You just have to be persistent at getting back there, right?
Well, yeah. So was that a moment where you found yourself practicing quite a bit to get back into bass shape?
Yeah, actually, I did start playing a lot, and for the first 4 years that I got back into it, I was still in the restaurant business and was able to, I would spend a lot of time late at night and a lot of time in the morning at it, and then the last restaurant space that I was in, we actually had a huge basement, and set up a band room down there, and was playing every night with a couple of guys in a improvisational rock group that we called ourselves Con Queso. Yeah, Con Queso actually played a couple of gigs with Porcupine in 2009, 2010.
So Casey had kind of been on your radar a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. The first time I saw Porcupine, they were opening for the Meat Puppets down in La Crosse, and I just thought they were awesome. And I was particularly impressed with Casey. He wrote really great songs, and he's got a very, distinct guitar style, and he could sing. He sings great. And I remember thinking, like, I got to find a guy like this someday. And lo and behold, he found me. So
yeah. I mean, I feel like if Porcupine had put records out in 83, they would have been an SST band. Like, to me, they have the spirit and the sound of the label at the time.
Yeah, I could see that. Yep. Yeah, SST definitely, looking back on all of the stuff that they put out, they did a great job of finding talent, finding bands.
Yeah, I could see a Porcupine record coming out somewhere in between that first Dinosaur record and the Buffalo Tom record, somewhere in that pocket.
Yeah, I could see that. Yep.
I know I'm fixated on the time you weren't playing, but I'm curious. I heard Tom Waits once said that just because you're not fishing, it doesn't mean you're not thinking about having your line in the water. And I wonder if all the time that you weren't playing, you were at least still thinking about it, or was it something you just sort of pushed in the back of your brain?
No, I always thought about it, but and I also definitely feel that a lot of musicians gravitate towards working in restaurant kitchens, because in a way there's a lot of similarities. Your menu is your set list. You just don't know how many times you're going to have to play a particular tune in a row. There's definitely choreography involved in working a busy line. Getting ready is like your sound check, and then once dinner starts, it's showtime. And when you're done, you do get some pretty much instant feedback from your audience. So I was always definitely kind of thinking about kind of the bridge between those two worlds. So it was always on my mind.
How are you with instant feedback? I'm not so sure I'm so good at it. I think I take it all personally.
Well, the one thing that I definitely learned in the restaurant business is, you need to hear the negative feedback, and you need to be reminded all the time that you can be better. Because if you constantly are just told that was great, you're great, eventually you start to believe it. And once you think that you're great, you're toast. You're done. It's you need to continue to try to be better. And I guess that's kind of the true in everything, right?
Well, yeah, because once you start to feel that you are great, I think you stop pushing yourself.
Right. Exactly.
So you're one of those guys, you can take a note. You can take some constructive feedback.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm of course, you're always your own worst critic. So, a lot of times, particularly like, playing live music, you notice every bad note or wrong note that you play. The audience probably doesn't pick up on it, but you hear it. And so some nights you're like, wow, that was a rough one. And everybody would be like, what are you talking about? And I'd be like, never mind. But, there again, it's the push to try to keep yourself improving.
How much does that resonate? I mean, I teach college, and 2 nights ago I taught a class. I didn't do a good job. I was off that night, and I still haven't let it go. So I wonder how hard are you on yourself? How long does that stuff resonate where you're like, oh, I was not in the pocket that night?
Usually just the drive home. It can be, some nights you drive home. I live an hour away from the Twin Cities from Minneapolis. So, some nights you drive home and nothing, no radio on, no music, just silence. But, by the next day you gotta push on and I always like the phrase, what is it? The only thing you should be better than is the person you were the day before. So try to carry that forward. Recently I heard a couple of things that I kind of wish I would have had somebody to tell me when I was younger, and it's a couple of things that I'm trying to instill in my kids. But the first one is hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. To remind them, like, hey, even if you think you're great, you got to work at it. And the power of the 3 P's: practice, patience, and persistence. You got to practice. You need to be patient because you're not going to be great overnight, and you need to stick at it. So, I guess I try to ingrain those thoughts into my world, and hopefully my kids will appreciate that someday too.
You always struck me as a hard worker, though. I mean, do you think you're a guy who you always were? To me, you came across that way as somebody who wasn't really screwing around.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of the whole, work ethic of Hüsker as well, though. But we'd get done with our tours, and I enjoyed taking some time off and hitting the golf course. And I think sometimes that bothered Bob and Grant that, I still had other friends with other interests and, didn't devote my entire life to, practicing my instrument and honing my craft. But, you got to have a release. You got to have some, something to balance that out. Otherwise then it does become work. I just want it to be fun. I want it to not be work. It's one of those things that, with Hüsker, it was, well, let's keep doing this until we're not having any fun anymore. And, 87, towards the end of 87, it was not that much fun anymore. So the breakup of the band was inevitable. The timing of how it went out and the circumstances were, just in a way, I suppose, just an excuse for how things went down. But I'm having a lot of fun with Porcupine. Actually, the playing with Ian and Casey, it feels like those early days of Hüsker, and it's so much fun playing live and practicing and rehearsing and writing tunes. And there's Casey writes the lyrics, and the 3 of us really hammer out all of the musical arrangement. So it's a lot of fun.
The idea of a national tour, is that daunting? Is that something? I know there's nothing scheduled, but is that because that's sort of logistically right now not possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously you need a few things in place to embark on a big tour, and one is the ability to get shows booked and be confident that you're going to be able to fill whatever room that you're going to be playing in. But also right now, I've got 2 young kids. We all have full-time jobs. I'm not saying that would prevent us from doing a larger tour. I think we would all welcome the opportunity to do that. But right now we're looking at probably long weekends, around the Midwest, and then eventually maybe next spring, like quick, 7 to 10 day runs to both coasts and possibly just straight down the through Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas and back up.
But the idea of leaving your family behind is probably not that appealing.
Well, they literally do grow so fast right now. So I'm really, and I was 55 when my first daughter was born. So I have been really involved in their lives, and been enjoying watching them grow up. And I want to continue to be there and help out. And right now they're kind of a handful. So um, you don't want to necessarily like just take off and you know uh, force a single parenting role on my wife for 10 days. So but we'll definitely work some shows out.
Had you always wanted to be a father, or it was something you kind of put off?
I never thought I was going to have kids, to be honest. Uh, I had been married previously and never had kids, and just wasn't part of the conversation. And when I met Toby, she has a beautiful stepdaughter who is now 12, and I've known her since she was 4. So after a few years, we just kind of we're talking about it, and I was like, after we had gotten married, it felt like it was. Let's just put it this way: I'm super happy that the opportunity didn't slip by, because I love being a dad.
Yeah, because I'm 48. I have no kids, but I'm certainly thinking about it. I just have to find someone who wants to think about it with me.
Right. Exactly.
But the idea of being a father later on in life, I think that I'd be better at it than I would have been at 25.
Oh, I totally agree. If I was trying to be a dad in my 20s or my 30s, it's I would have not been home much. Would have missed out on a lot of things, and as it is now, I'm with the kids all the time, and I'm definitely a part of their everyday life and their development, and watching them grow and get smarter every day it's such a trip.
What have you learned about yourself through fatherhood?
Well, you definitely learn to be even more patient than you have been. It's my kids are 16 months apart, so right now I think Stella, the younger daughter, she, sometimes you forget that, hey, she's not even 3 yet. So it's hard to reason with them at that age, but I don't know. It's just fun. It's making them laugh, hearing them laugh is the greatest thing ever. So,
were your parents like pretty cool people? Were they strict? And do you find yourself feeling sometimes like you have a better understanding of them now?
Maybe, I don't know, a little bit. It's my dad wasn't home a lot when I was younger. He had a traveling sales gig, although I always thought he was a cool dude, but I just didn't really spend a whole lot of time with him. And as I was growing up, my mom was involved with a lot of activities, so she wouldn't be home a lot at night. It's my older sister. Basically, she was kind of the one kind of taking care of me mostly for a lot of times. And my folks split up when I was 14, and I don't know. So I don't see myself as the same kind of parent that my parents were, and maybe that's it. Maybe I'm trying not to be my parents.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. There are times where I'll say things where I feel like I sound like my parents, and I go, ugh, God.
Oh yeah, no, I I think that's inevitable, and then you're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I guess the DNA is strong.
Yep.
What is your relationship now with your bass? How would you compare yourself as a musician now, say, to when you were 25? What has changed, do you think, in your approach?
I still kind of practice the same way. Some days it's working on technical stuff, but mostly it's just kind of running through some things. Although now I actually do have something that I can plug in, like my phone into and play along with tunes. So I'm actually been kind of going out and listening to stuff and kind of challenging my stuff to learn some other people's music, and that just to kind of round things out. But I don't know. I still try to play every day, and ideally the ultimate goal would have the musician be the full-time job, and to be playing as many shows with the band as we could on a regular basis. So I don't know. It's I really like playing my bass.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, maybe I appreciate it more now than when I was 25. So.
Were you competitive then? I know that sort of the playing field was really, even just on the label alone for SST was stocked with great players. Were you a competitive guy? Would you look around and go, "Oh man, that guy's killing it. I got to step it up," or were you just competitive with yourself? And is that how you are now too?
Well, yeah, I mean, competitive with myself, definitely. In the SST, it's like the Minutemen and Hüsker Du, those guys were like brothers to us, and so watching Watt play, it's like Chris Kirkwood and Mike Watt and Chuck Dukowski and myself. I mean, we're all totally different players. It's I don't think anybody was ever trying to be like, oh, I'm gonna out Watt, or everybody was just doing their own thing. So yeah, definitely competitive with yourself to challenge yourself. And today it's the same thing. It's like I'm not gonna go out and try to be some other bass player. I'm just gonna keep being myself. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I also, by the way, I don't think anyone can out Watt. I don't think that can happen.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I dare anyone to try. The idea that, these guys were talking about, years ago, friendships. I saw you guys play with the Meat Puppets. Are you still maintaining relationships and friendships that you've had in the industry for the last 35 years or so? Or is that hard to do?
Actually, it's easier to do nowadays than it was, 10 years ago. So, Porcupine, we've already played a number of shows with the Meat Puppets, and Watt came through last summer with the Puppets, and we did a couple of shows with them. It was the Tour 2, kind of a knockoff of the original SST tour that was Hüsker, Minutemen, Meat Puppets, SWA, and Worm, I think. But anyway, it's through Facebook, oddly enough, it's like, I'm in contact with Clint Connolly from Mission of Burma and all the Burma guys, and Watt and King Coffee from the Surfers, and and it's everybody is it's kind of fun because you're seeing everybody's kind of like regular life pop up in your feed. So yeah, it's fun kind of reconnecting with folks.
The very first band I interviewed in my life, I was 16. I interviewed the band Angst. Remember them from?
Oh yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, really like a lovely guy. I can't remember the singer's name. Great guy, and he was talking to me about the SST life, and it just sounded like there was a real brotherhood, like a legitimate organic confederacy. And so to hear that you are still pals with a lot of those guys I think it's a very cool thing.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. That's um, I'm sure there were. I think you've got various camps like that around the country. You've got the whole like Discord uh, group out in DC. It seems like those guys are still pretty, solid. And it's Seattle. I think a lot of those people are pretty still connected. Although, of course, a lot of those people are on a much larger stage these days. So.
Yeah, I like hearing that because it's sort of like it's a kind of a punk rock fraternity or a platoon of some kind. Like you've been through something together, and I just think that's very cool.
Right. That's because, punk rock was life. It wasn't a lifestyle.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
I listened to the Porcupine record, and I love it. And I think Casey's a really special guy. His
Yeah, I totally
songs,
agree.
he's amazing. I mean, he really is, and he kind of came out of nowhere for me. I jumped on the second record. Um, but what a special group of songs. But I have to sort of ask about the Grant Hart cover, which by the way is fantastic. Was that an easy choice? Grant wrote so many great songs. Why that one?
Well, last summer on July 1st, Lori Barbero from Babes in Toyland put together a kind of a surprise tribute night for Grant. He was uh, playing at a small club called the Hook and Ladder in Minneapolis, and Lori called up a bunch of people, a bunch of friends, and said like, "Hey, this is what we want to do. I want all you guys to just play Grant music, and then we're going to surprise Grant, and then he'll play at the end of the night." So we got up and we played a 5-song Hüsker Du set. We did kind of a mashup of "What Do I Want" and um, "What's Going On," and then into that we played "It's Not Funny Anymore," "Dead Set on Destruction," and then "Standing by the Sea." And the crowd reaction was wild. People were just kind of going nuts to hear the Hüsker stuff. And then after that, both Ian and Casey were like, "Hey, let's keep Standing by the Sea in the set. That's like a really fun one to play." And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds good." And then, a few weeks later, Ian suggested that we make that one of the songs we take into the studio when we go in. And I'm like, "I think that's a fantastic idea." So we did, and that's and basically at that point, uh, that was after Grant had passed. Uh, so we kept it in the set and um, kind of as a tribute to Grant.
Is it still very difficult to think of him in the past tense? It's hard for me as a fan to even think about that.
Um, yeah, definitely. He was bigger than life. So I miss the guy. We just played down in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and a guy down there gave me a recording that he made of a solo Grant gig from Iowa City, and listening to that, and it was all the in between song banter. It's like, oh, Grant, uh, put a smile on my face, but also it's like, wow, holy crap, you really just said that to that lady. That's so you. Yeah.
Were you in touch with him in the last couple of years?
A little bit. He lived in the Twin Cities. I'm down in Red Wing. We were kind of in semi-regular contact, getting the whole Savage Young Do project rolling. I was very sad that he didn't get to see the release. I think he actually would have been pretty happy with how it turned out. And after that Hook and Ladder show, we kind of more reconnected on a personal level instead of just a business level. So that was nice. It's Grant and I were very close friends before the band started up, and in a way, the band kind of put a little bit of a wedge in that friendship, but still think of him as my friend as opposed to, the guy I used to work with, so.
Right. The guy in the cubicle to my left.
Right.
It's funny, when I was a kid, when I was 16, they put out, I think it was Warner Brothers sent this interview record that you guys did. They would send out this vinyl copy of an interview. And at the very end of the interview, I've been haunted by this, Greg, for like 30 years. At the end of the interview, Grant said, "Oh, we're going to be around forever. We're going to be like the Grateful Dead." And I believed him, man.
Uh-huh.
So I was really surprised when things had ended not soon after that. And I always felt like, what?
Yep.
So
yeah, it was, I was saying, the breakup was pretty much inevitable at that point. I think I was the only one that really wanted to keep the band rolling. And, it's funny, a couple of years ago, I saw this Bob article pop up online, and the quote was, if George Martin would have produced our third album, Hüsker Dü would have never broken up. So supposedly Bob was trying to get Warner's to get George Martin out of retirement. And according to this article, Warner's was like, well, we can get the guy that engineered all the George Martin sessions. And Bob's like, nope, not good enough. But I just thought that was interesting. Like, okay, really? So if George Martin would have produced the third Warner's record, we'd still be together? Curious.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense in my brain.
Right. So then we'd be the Grateful Dead Beatles.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Well, it certainly would have been interesting. Do you feel sometimes that Hüsker Dü is sort of like the elephant in the room? I mean, I appreciate you addressing it. I mean, I don't know if it gets annoying or not.
Well, not that many people tend to ask about the demise or anything like that. Actually, at our CD release show here at Ice House a couple weeks ago, this guy came up and introduced himself, and he's like, "The last time I saw you play was at the Blue Note in Columbia, Missouri." And I'm like, "Holy shit, you were at the last show?" And he's like, "Yep." And he said, "Yeah, that was a rough show to watch." And I had totally forgotten that basically the show ended when somebody threw a beer can at Bob and hit him, and that's when Bob's like, "That's it, we're getting off the stage." But he said, "Oh yeah, well, the Porcupine Show definitely made up for that last Hüsker show." So
that's cool.
I'm like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would imagine that beer cans were flying all the time, though.
Sometimes, the very first time we played Austin, Texas, we played at this club called the Ritz, and people started chucking beer cans at us, and we were like, "What the hell?" Bob even caught one in air and threw it back at the guy that threw it. And then when we got done, we're like, "What's up with the crowd? They kept throwing beer cans at us." And I think it might have been King Coffee. I think he was with us on that. He wrote our Hüsker Dü, our very first fan letter, by the way.
Wow.
Yep. So, it might have been somebody from the big boys. They were like, "You know what? Throwing empty beer cans at you, that means they like you. If they didn't like you, they'd throw full beer cans at you." I'm like, "Oh, got it."
Right, like in the punk days, if you spit on the band, it means you like them.
Yeah, we never liked that, though.
No.
Especially, you get over to England, and they were really into gobbing on you. Thought it was rather disgusting.
Yeah, that's how Strummer got hepatitis, I think.
Probably.
Yeah. If that was a rough show for that guy to watch, was that last show a rough one to play too?
It was tough. Bob, Grant was not in good shape. He was, it sounded like he was barely hitting the drums, and vocals weren't very strong. Our sound guy had pulled all the drums out of the front, the mains in the front of the house. So it was not a fun gig to play, that's for sure.
Well, I've been watching a lot of the Porcupine footage on YouTube, and it sure looks fun to play with those guys.
Oh, it's a blast. Yep.
Yeah, it looks like it. So goals, maybe a full length, maybe a tour. So things are happening with this band.
Yes, and I would say yes to both of those. Get back into the studio as soon as we can. Get more, keep writing songs, and eventually get out on the road and do some extended touring. We'd love to get over to England. The record will have distribution in the UK and also in Germany. So hopefully an overseas jaunt will be in line. Well, it's just get on, strap in, and see how far we go.
Do you feel more creatively alive than you have in a long time?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Like I said, it feels like the early days of Hüsker. So it's a lot of fun right now.
The fire is back.
Exactly.
Cool. Greg, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you chatting with me, man. It's so cool to get a chance to sit down with you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, nice chatting with you, and thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, and good luck with everything, and I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, take care.
All right, so there you go, the mighty Greg Norton, a lovely guy. PorcupineBand.com will hook you up with all you need to know about that band, so go there. As for Stereo Embers, the podcast, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, and we're on iTunes. Visit us there, subscribe, leave ratings, throw us some stars. You know how it works. Find me on Instagram, Embers Podcast. Find me on Twitter, @EmbersEditor. And find me at alexgreenonline.com. And you'll find me here next week, bringing you another episode of Stereo Embers, the podcast. Let's finish things off with Porcupine. Thank you as always for listening, and I will see you next time right here on Bombshell Radio.